We do have a few minutes for questions. If there are burning things you'd like to ask the panel, and whilst you're thinking about that, I'll get going with one. So publishers are very good with coming up with ideas for problems we can solve, but often the best solutions are found when we collaborate with research groups who are actually going to use the solution. So I wonder if the panel could address how best to engage with research groups and library groups based on the experience that you've had. Laurie, perhaps I'll start with you.
You need to press the button. So I think a lot of times when you're working when you're working in trying to develop a community solution, people don't reach out and say you can be part of this solution. I think once you start getting people at the table for the conversation, to actually involve them in creating a part of the solution, they start to own it and become a part of it. So I would just say be creative and think about how you can involve people in developing systems.
If I can add to that, if you're trying to work on a difficult problem and you're pulling together a group of people, it's easy to pull together a group that all have the same opinion and agree with you. Well, you're not going to get very far. Okay? So pulling together a diverse group with a diverse group of opinions makes the exercise more interesting. And ultimately, if you obey another rule that I have with these things, define the problem as simply as possible. If it's a complex problem, divide it up. And the third principle, put yourself in a nice place, provide some libations, and get to know your collaborators.
I don't know that I have anything more to add to that. I think I agree very much with Laurel about trying to involve those groups in the solution. And I think one of the challenge, we were talking about this earlier as well for the Think, Check, Submit. Actually, I was talking with Ruth Francis about this, that our next challenge now is getting this into the hands of the researchers. And so there we probably need to be even more inclusive with the types of organizations that are also on the front lines, just as we are with those communities, to think about a solution with us about how to do that.
And just to add to that, I think the research groups that we at Research for Life aim to get collaboration with and from are a little bit more difficult to get at, I think, than perhaps our more core research group markets. I would encourage any publishers here who regularly communicate with people in the developing world to give a shout out to Research for Life and make them aware that this content is available, and perhaps particularly draw their attention to the training page on the Research for Life website. The best way we can get collaboration with researchers is through training them. That's a very resource intensive and finance intensive exercise. So the more we can supplement that by making them aware of the training that actually is available from our website, then that's so much the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Well, speaking of libations, I'm not seeing any desperate hands in the air to ask questions. Oh, Richard, we do have one just there. Richard Padley behind. Sorry.
Thanks. It's Richard Padley from Sematic. Actually, this is more not a question, so it's a really easy one. But thank you to Richard Geddy, most particularly, actually, for consistently using the word impact in a way that we don't often hear it used in this room. In the sense that we're often quite concerned with impact that accrues either at the researcher level or at the publisher level. So thank you, Richard, for actually talking a lot about impact without using the word factor at the end, because I think it's something that's very, that is often missed, frankly, in our conversation. And the second was, it was Durrell. So I just, Laurie asked for the orchid.
Oh.
It's Durrell's orchid, was it not?
Yes, it was.
He gets the orange.
No, you go first. You've asked me. I'm asking already.
Sorry.
very quick anecdote, if I may. My name is Kaveh Bazargan from River Valley. I tend to Google myself quite a lot, and it's very easy to find, but there's not many of them. And as far as I know, there are only 2 in the whole world. So I'm all over the web, but there's one person who's always above me. Cut a long story short, he's also from Iran, like me. I emailed him and we met up. We went to an Iranian restaurant together. And so I did a PhD in 3D imaging many years ago, and he did a PhD in 3D graphical user interface. And we were talking, he's a young lad, and he said, oh, my H index is really high. I said, why? He said, because all the papers you wrote have gone into my H index. And I really got angry. I said, well, what can we do about this? Well, he said, well, you can't do anything. However, when Orchid came out, I was one of the first people who went there, and I think that's fixed it. So thank you very much, Laurel.
Yeah, one last question,
One last
Phil.
question. Hi, Phil Jones from Digital Science. And as a Phil Jones, there's multiple ones of me. And there's a bass player, and there's a professional footballer who plays for Man U, and a Welsh paediatrician. So there's quite a few of them. So my question's for Caroline. You mentioned that some researchers are more at risk than others of being taken in by journals that are not serious journals. So many of those are in emerging markets and not necessarily English as their first language. So have you thought about, or are you translating the site into multiple languages, particularly for target markets?
Actually, that is an excellent question, and it gives me an opportunity to say, yes, in fact, we are. So obviously, the English was the first launch, but we're working with both INASP, the DOAJ is involved, they've got associate librarians around the world that are helping, so we will be translating, yes, because we do think that's very important.
Thank you for some excellent questions and anecdotes. So with that, I am keeping you from your lunch. So it only remains for me to thank our speakers, Fred, Caroline, Richard and Laurel, and also to thank our sponsor for lunch, Atapon. Thank you for your attention and for all of you for bearing with me on with the technological challenges with moving between speakers. Please be back at 1:15. Thanks very much.